I've heard stories like these, but I never thought it would happen to me, especially since I live in the suburbs. I mean, stuff like this is supposed to happen in isolated areas, right? I guess it can happen anywhere. I don't know. It was late at night. Everyone was asleep besides me and my dog, Ollie. It was a Friday night, and I stayed up to relax from work. I was just watching TV, really, flipping through the channels, nothing really in particular. I ended up staying on some sitcom, I think, until Ollie started acting weird. At first, he just raised his head a few times, looking at the window and the door wall. After a while, though, he started to growl and then got up pacing. Something was outside, and he wasn't very happy about it. His hair was standing on end, and he wouldn't stop even when I told him to quiet down. I didn't want him to get hurt, so I put him in his crate, and I put my shoes and jacket on. It was November, a week before Thanksgiving, so it was pretty chilly. There was some light snow. I turned one of the outdoor lights on, and I headed outside. I didn't hear anything at first. The wind was starting to pick up, though, and I thought it was just leaves blowing around. Something, though, made me feel weird. I can't really describe it. So I picked up a shovel that was leaning against the house. I had used it a few days before to dig up the flower beds. At first, I thought I was being stupid. You're in your own backyard. What are you doing? I looked around the garage, the deck, and along the fence line, and I didn't see anything. It wasn't until I walked back towards the back door that movement caught my eye. Just a shadow at first, I don't know. I look up towards the roof and start walking back a little to get a better look. That's when I see it, trying to hide itself by the chimney and gripping the roof, trying to make itself look as small as possible. It was short, maybe 4 feet or 4.5. It was hard to tell because it was on all fours. Its legs and arms were long and skinny. It seemed to have some sort of nails or claws. It was hard to tell since they were dug in pretty good. It was the face, though. That's what I dream about the most. It was pale, the whole thing really, like a chalky white-gray, maybe more gray than white. It was dark out, but this thing was pretty light. Its head seemed big, but maybe that's because its body was so thin. Its eyes were huge, and she kind of glowed with any light she caught, like a dog's or cat's will do. It had slits for a nose, and its mouth was kind of trembling at first, but when it opened to hiss at me, I could see sharp teeth. I think its tongue was pointed. It shot out a little when it hissed. I didn't know what to think or do at first, but when it started moving, I remembered the shovel in my hands. I just held it up at first, but the thing kept moving, so then I started swinging it at the edge of the roof. It moved like a cat, very nimble, and it was pretty fast too. I thought maybe I could reach it on the deck. I run up the stairs, and this thing is staring right at me. I swing the shovel, and at first it backed up and moved out of the way. But when I swung maybe the third time, it reached out and slapped the blade of the shovel, knocking it back and hissing. I didn't want it to leap down on top of me. Something screamed in my head that would be extremely bad. So I recover as best I can, and I start to jab the blade of the shovel at it now. That's when it smacked the shovel again, hard enough that I lost my balance and came crashing to the deck. I figured that was it. Whatever this thing was dead. The shovel was too far away to reach. It fell to the deck and bounced away from where I fell. I just closed my eyes and waited for this thing to drop down on me. It never did, though. I opened my eyes back up, got up, and there was nothing on the roof. It seemed to be gone. I didn't want to chance it, though. I don't know if my adrenaline was just pumping out of control or what, but I go into the garage and get a ladder. I also grabbed a hatchet I had, and I put the ladder against the roof and climbed up. I searched the entire roof. I looked at my neighbors' roofs. There was nothing. I woke up my wife in the process, and she was extremely confused, to say the least. I came down, put the ladder and hatchet away, and came inside. I made sure everything was locked up tight, and then told them the story. She said she believed me, but I wasn't sure, not until the next day. It was hard to sleep. I got maybe 2 hours. I'm not really sure. I went back out in the morning and went back up on the roof to look around in the daylight. That's when I saw them. There was a group of shingles that had deep gouges in them, like claw marks, near and around the chimney. I pulled them free and brought them back down to show my wife. That seemed to sink into their minds, because the look she gave me, it was something else. I don't know what I saw, what I tried to fight off. I replaced the shingles and I've stayed up a few nights. It's hard to sleep now. It hasn't come back, though. I don't know if it will. If it wasn't for Ollie, I don't know. Every Thanksgiving, I take my family down to New Jersey to visit my parents. They're getting older, and I want my 2 boys to spend as much time as possible with them before the inevitable happens. They live on an immense piece of property not too far from the Wharton State Forest. They aren't overly wealthy or anything. The land has been in my family's hands for over 100 years. My grandfather used to operate a farm on it, but those days are long gone. We were going to stay a total of 5 days. It was just me, my wife, 2 sons, and my parents, so it was a quiet Thanksgiving. At first, anyway. My parents went to bed super early, so we had more of a Thanksgiving lunch, and then just relaxed in the afternoon, spending time outside and working off the food. Then, around 3 p.m., my wife and I were finishing up the cleaning while my parents rested in the living room. Our oldest asked if he could take his 3-year-old brother outside to play for a little bit, and we both told him that would be fine. About 100 yards away from the back of the house is a small pond, maybe 20 feet wide. It wasn't more than a foot deep, and there were no fish in it. But deer and other critters would often come from the nearby woods to grab a drink from it. We told my son to stay away from it, more so that the kids didn't accidentally get wet rather than from any danger of drowning. But letting them go outside turned out to be a big mistake. About 20 minutes had passed, and I was at the sink wiping down the last bowl when I looked out to check on the kids. The view from the window encompassed a good portion of the back of the property, including the little pond. The sun was almost down, but I could just make out a large shape, head bent down, over by the pond. I dropped my bowl in the sink and quickly rushed out the back door. Deer are common in the area, and if this thing was as big as I thought it was, then it was probably a buck. They were usually harmless, but I'd seen plenty of YouTube videos of them attacking people and wanted to get my kids back inside. But they were nowhere in sight. The view from the back door isn't as good as the window. My mother kept a substantial garden and had some high rose bushes that she was proud of. I walked quickly around them, and with a quiet sigh of relief caught sight of my 2 boys. Only something was definitely wrong. I could see them, about 100 feet away, hunkered down behind the stump of a large tree my father had removed a few years ago. It seemed like my oldest son had his hand clamped around the younger one's mouth, who was starting to squirm and fidget. I started towards them and came around the rose bushes, which gave me a view of the pond. I got a better look at the thing that was drinking from the pond and felt a flood of panic when I realized that it wasn't a deer at all. The thing was the size of a big horse, at least 7 feet high. It was hard to tell exactly, but I could almost swear it had a set of wings tucked in against the sides of its body. I felt a sense of unexplainable dread wash over me. Something in my mind was screaming for me to get away from it, but there was no way I would ever have left my kids. Almost immediately, another fear, the fear of being seen by this thing, came over me, and I dropped to the ground. I crawled army style the rest of the way to where the kids were, and after getting about halfway, they spotted me. I gave my oldest the signal to stay put, and even the younger one calmed a bit when he saw me. I couldn't see the creature from my vantage point, but I knew for certain that it was still there. Eventually, I got to them. I popped my head over the stump and confirmed the creature was still there, though something appeared to have drawn its attention away from us. It was now looking at the tree line at the back of the property. We had a problem. I couldn't crawl with my youngest son and wouldn't dare let him out of my grasp once I had him. The older one would be fine, but I didn't want to separate. We were going to have to run for it. Saying this now is easy, but in the moment, the idea of this thing seeing us was horrifying, and I was almost paralyzed by my terror. But as a parent, keeping my children safe overrode anything else I may have felt. I hashed out the path we would take, and after a few deep breaths we took off, me carrying the youngest. We had gone about halfway, and I thought we were going to get away unseen when I heard it. It sounded like a bleating mixed with a screaming person. It was piercing, and I stumbled when I heard it. My oldest, a few feet ahead, stopped mid-run and covered his ears. I shifted my youngest to one arm and grabbed my oldest's hand as I passed him. We could see the back door ahead of us, and the sound must have drawn my wife's attention. She opened the door, wide-eyed as she caught sight of us running towards her. I shouted for her to get back inside, and my voice seemed to aggravate the thing. I could hear a slight gust of wind, like something taking off, and the bleating rose into the air behind us. But closer. We dashed the last few yards to the back door and dove inside the house, landing in a pile. My wife slammed the door closed, and we all sat in complete silence. The noise continued for another few moments, coming from all around the house like the sound of a helicopter circling, until it eventually faded away and then was gone altogether. We were a little banged up from falling into the house, but otherwise okay. My parents had snoozed through the entire scenario, and when I asked them what it was, they looked confused and said they have not idea. We stayed another day and ended up cutting our trip a day short. Part of me felt terrible about leaving my parents there with that thing in the area, but on the other hand, they had lived there for 70 years without incident. Of course, I have heard stories of monsters like the Jersey Devil, and the thing we saw matched the description. But there's no way that it's actually real and that we encountered it. Is there? I want to share an experience I had in West Virginia, where I grew up. It happened a few years ago when I went home to visit. I live in Ohio now, but I was raised in the Little Kanawha River Basin, so I was home in the fall that year for Thanksgiving. Since I was visiting, I didn't have my dogs with me, but my brother Ted hunts too. Kind of runs in the family. We had planned to hunt together that night, but he and his girl had gotten in a spat, and all he wanted to do was sit home and mope about it. I couldn't convince him to come out with me, but he told me to just take the dogs out myself. So I did. Now Ted's got blue ticks, a pair of them named Nate and Jonesy. Myself, I keep Walker hounds, but everyone has their favorites. Nate and Jonesy were pretty excited to load up, you know. It's funny, dogs always know when you're taking them out for a hunt. There's a spot on Oil Creek where I usually park and let the boys out. It's best if you let them run a bit to get it out of their system. A good hound knows when it's time to quit playing. Ted's dogs are well trained too. As soon as I whistled and started walking down the river trail, they got down to business. After a couple of false leads, suddenly Jonesy gets the scent and starts baying. I gave him his head, and he took off with Nate on his heels. I heard them tree something up ahead and thought, boy, that didn't take long. It was a clear night, with a good moon, and sometimes that brings good luck. I mean, probably it's just that the coons are more active or something, but I always do better when the moon's bright. I got to where they were, practically trying to climb that damn tree themselves, and told them to stand down. I shined my light up in the branches and didn't see a thing. I was surprised because this didn't seem like a false lead, the way they were carrying on. So I kept shining, walking around the tree, thinking there had to be a coon up in there somewhere, and that's when I saw it. Damn creepiest thing I've ever seen. My light caught the edge of this black, leathery wing, kind of like a bat's wing, only it was huge. I mean, it had to have been 4.5 feet long, maybe 2 feet wide. Seriously, I didn't even understand what I was seeing at first, but it had those, what do you call them? Ribs? those things that divide the wing into sections like a bat's wing has. I was so startled. I almost dropped my light. I think I might have said "holy crap" or something, and then the wing moved and I saw the rest of it. Okay, this is the crazy part. It looked like a human's body, but smoother. I mean, it had a head and a torso and legs, not like a bird. It was all one color, except for the wings, like a medium gray. I couldn't see its feet, but its head was small in proportion to its body, and it must have been scared, because the head was tucked down to its chest, like it was hiding. At this point, the dogs are getting restless and starting to whine. I snapped out a command to hush, and that's when the thing looked up. Total freak show. Its face was a pale gray, almost white, and it was blank. I guess that's the best way to describe it. I was shining the light right on that sucker, and I'm telling you, it didn't have features like a nose or a mouth, just eyes. And the eyes were small and glowing red, like them toy bats they sell at Halloween where the eyes light up when you flip a switch. Okay, so I took a shot at it. I know some of your viewers are going to be angry and argue the thing might have been peaceful, but I was acting on pure instinct. The creature was so damn unnatural, and I admit, I was kind of nervous. I didn't know what the hell it was going to do, so I raised my rifle and took a shot. I must have missed. I say must have because the thing took off, just leapt out of the tree and sailed away in the night. I tried to follow it with my flashlight, and that beam's pretty strong, but I couldn't track it. It was gone. I don't know how I missed it. I was right below it, maybe 18 feet away, tops. Should have been an easy shot. I came back the next day and looked around in the daylight for some sign of it. Feathers or weird blood or something. Didn't find anything. I told my brother Ted about it, and he just laughed at me. Asked if I'd been drinking. He can be an ass sometimes. But I know what I saw, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. I've told a few other hunters I know, and you know, hunters see a lot of strange stuff out there when the rest of the world is asleep. Then last winter I was talking to a guy, trading hunting stories, when I brought up seeing a creature in West Virginia that looked like a giant bat. Human, he told me about the Mothman. Turns out, his brother-in-law had a similar story, hunting in Pennsylvania. He said that poor guy was so freaked out, seeing that thing up in a tree by the swamp, that he turned tail and ran. Made me feel good. Not just that someone else had seen the same thing, but also that I was brave enough to try to take it down. So that's my story if you want to share it. Thanks. I should have never gone to the woods late at night. I regret what I saw. And I can't get anyone else to believe me when I tell them what I saw, so I'm hoping I can reach someone else with my story. Someone who went through something similar. I live in the infamous town of Salem, Massachusetts. Almost all of us have heard of the Salem witch trials. In fact, that's what my town is known for. And actually, I wish my story involved witches because it would be a lot easier for me to deal with and more believable. Anyway, now that you get an idea where I live, let me tell you what happened on the night of July 13th of this year. I decided to go hang out with a few of my friends. We were in the middle of the woods just having fun, having a nice bonfire going in an open clearing. I think it was around 1 or 2 in the morning when we all decided we were going to pack up and stumble back home. Everyone wanted to buddy up and leave the woods in pairs, but we had an odd number. My house was only a few blocks away from the entrance of the woods, so I said that I was fine walking by myself. As I was following the trail back to the entrance of the woods, I thought I saw something staring at me behind a tree. I thought it was one of my buddies who decided it would be funny to prank me, so I played along and pretended to be scared. I thought I heard them say something, but then I looked more closely at them, and I realized I did not know who it was. It didn't look like anyone I knew. The eyes were popping out of their sockets almost. The mouth was curled into a malicious smile, and I could see something popping out of its head. This was not anywhere near Halloween, so there was no reason to think that it was a costume. I just stood there and froze. I didn't know what to do. Whoever it was behind the tree started to come out towards me, and before I got a better look, I made a break for it and ran. I don't know where I was running to, but luckily my feet went the right direction, and I ended up at the entrance to the woods. When I got home and into bed, I was thinking if I was just seeing things because it was so late and dark. When I went to sleep, though, the weirdest thing happened to me. I dreamt I was still in the woods, right in front of the thing I saw earlier, but this time I wasn't able to move away. It slowly stepped out from behind the tree and walked towards me. It didn't talk, but I thought I could hear it say something in my head. I just heard the word suffer over and over again. It was in a deeper voice, but yet it felt like it was screaming at me. I felt like my head was going to explode with how the thing talked. It looked human, except for whatever it was that was on top of its head. I woke up right when it was face to face with me, and it opened its mouth. That morning, I started texting my buddies to see if any of them saw me in the woods, and if it was them who pranked me. No one knew what I was talking about. That was 3 months ago. I still see the person or thing or whatever it is in my dreams. I even dreamt I woke up before with it in my bedroom doorway, and it started hissing at me while smiling. What do you think it was? Am I going insane? Or was I not supposed to run into whatever it was in the woods? I'm afraid to close my eyes at this point, and I just need someone to believe me. Someone to save me from whatever is going on. In the late 90s, I'd just come out of law enforcement training when I decided I wanted to become a wilderness ranger. I lived in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and got signed up for a survival camp in the area. We met at the Elkmont campground in the Great Smoky Mountains with a group of 5 other survivalists and a group leader and his assistant. They would stay with us for 3 days and show us techniques. We went over things like setting up shelters, learning how to forage and set traps, and different ways to make fire. We each got a backpack filled with essential things. The Elkmont Trail led to an old town that felt really eerie. The town was basically abandoned in 1992 when the leases expired and people living there left. The place was kept up by the National Park Service and was well preserved like the logging town it used to be. We were approved by the NPS to use one of the buildings as a base for our training. We used the Little Pigeon River to get water, which we would boil to kill any bacteria. We were shown a few natural springs in the area that you could drink fresh. After the first 3 days, we were let go on our own. From the base camp, the leader would walk us several miles into the forest. Each of us were taken at different times and given a satellite radio for emergencies. The group leaders would stay at base and wait 5 days, then come get us. My first day went great. I set a couple traps and built a decent lean-to on the side of a large boulder. My fire was doing a solid job of heating the rock wall to keep it warm inside. It was cold and there was some drizzle, but nothing major. I was only about 50 yards from the river. I ate a protein bar and some plants I collected. After sunset, it was very dark outside the firelight. I had enough wood collected to keep any critters at bay. But I was awoken in the night by the satellite phone. Another trainee was complaining about some large animal walking around his campsite. He thought it was a bear, but it sounded like it was walking on 2 legs. But I didn't hear anything else the rest of the night. The next morning, though, I found human-looking tracks, but they were much bigger than my feet, and the toes appeared claw-like. There was nothing else unusual until night 3. Around 1 a.m., a large rock hit the back of my lean-to. I figured a loose rock had just rolled down from the top of the boulder. I grabbed the flashlight and assessed the damage. I rolled the rock off the shelter and figured I'd fix it up better in the morning. I started hearing noises in the woods. I shined the light that way, but saw nothing as the trees were too thick. Then something screamed. It sounded like a gorilla when it gets angry, followed by a chuffing sound, like when a dog has drank too much water, a deep in-the-throat noise. I stood there frozen, thinking it was a bear. All I had for weapons were a hatchet and a pocket knife. I threw some logs on the fire, thinking it would keep any animals away. I sat for maybe 30 minutes when another rock came hurling out of the woods and fell about 10 yards away. I knew that one wasn't from the boulder. I started feeling panicky. I stood up hoping to make myself look large with my shadow on the boulder behind me. I heard that chuffing sound again, and smaller trees further in seemed to be moving back and forth. I could see a large black shape moving around just at the edge of where the firelight reached. I heard the thing breaking tree limbs as it walked. I estimated the shape I saw to be around 7 or 8 feet tall. I could tell where the thing's head was watching me, since every now and then I could see the eyes shine. Then it started moving away, and I heard it go into the river and cross it. I sat down and considered what I should do. It was around 2 a.m., and I didn't want to walk the 4 miles back to Elkmont in the dark. I kept nodding off, but around 4 a.m. the satellite phone turned on and a guy was shouting, "Something's throwing rocks at me. Something huge is outside my shelter. I don't know what it is, but it's not a bear. I need help." Then another guy came on and said, "Something was walking around my camp last night, but I thought it was a bear." The guides must have woken up at this point, as the group leader got on and said they could call the park service to come get everyone. But that would be a matter of hours, and we should stay put. At my camp, everything was feeling normal again. Right before sunrise, I saw flashlights in the distance. I started gathering my things and putting the fire out. By the time it was out, the rangers were there with me. One of the older guys was of Native American descent. He said there were stories of wild men in those woods that didn't take to strange people using their land. I tried to ask more, but he said we do not talk of these men. We walked back to Elkmont and met the rest of the group. One guy was pretty shaken up, and I assumed he was the one yelling on the phone. He kept saying its teeth were like an ape's, that he couldn't get those teeth out of his head. I finished the training, but then I decided to go work at a state park in a more urban area. I don't know. I never wanted to feel such a primal fear as I felt that night. There's so many things we just don't understand.